Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. If you've been listening to this podcast or are new to it, I thank you very much. I would also appreciate if you took a moment to follow it on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. Today's guest is author Jessica George, who writes under the pen name J.L. George. She lives in Cardiff, Wales, and writes weird and speculative fiction. She also writes contemporary urban fantasy as Louise Long. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, actually, we're having you back now because you were on the podcast when we were at the awards workshop week back in April of 2022. So this time it's just you and me instead of all the UK winners.
Yes, no cushion.
Yes. So I will obviously want to discuss the book, The Word, and how it came to be. But I'd also like to address the use of dystopian theme to convey a cautionary tale of what to avoid. So now there have been various incarnations of the word.
So it started life as a kind of 12,000-ish word novelette, which I entered for the New Welsh Writing Awards in 2019. And they do generally focus on short form writing. So it won the first place for that.
Which is amazing. I just want to congratulate you for that, but make sure I had it straight. That was that was in 2019, right? That you won that award.
Yes, it was. Yeah, thank you. So it won one of the two prizes which formed part of that year's New Welsh Writing Awards, which was the Aberystwyth University Award for a Dystopian Novella. And part of the prize for that was publication with New Welsh Rare Bites, which is the publishing arm of the New Welsh Review.
Right.
And so kind of about a year later, when they were getting ready to publish, Gwen, who is the editor, got in touch with me sort of saying, do you have any other stories that we could add to make a bit of to pad it out, make a bit of a longer collection? And that happened to be after the first COVID lockdown, which I had spent writing a continuation of the words, prompted by a comment made in a critique by the agent Catherine Summerhays. And so I sort of got back to her and said, well, I don't have any short stories you could have at this point, but I do have another 70,000 words in the same world. So we can put that together and make a novel. Yeah.
Which is amazing. It was like, because I didn't read your shorter version of The Word, but it was interesting on your book, The Word. And we're also we'll be asking on this interview questions that are a little bit maybe different than normally when you talk about a book, because we're going to talk about the book, but I also want to talk about what went into it and how you came to be, because a lot of the audience on this are aspiring writers, so they can get some inspiration from yourself and what to do, because it's a very popular genre, has been for some years, the whole idea of dystopian science fiction. So what was the inspiration? Obviously, you've got the UK having broken from the EU, or at least that's what it seems to be, as a basis. But I don't know if that's the basis or something else was the basis that started it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That was one thing that went into it. It would be disingenuous to pretend that Brexit didn't have anything to do with it. Kind of after quite a long period, really, of kind of anti-immigrant sentiment being whipped up in the tabloid press, and which I think was something that really contributed to people voting for Brexit, which you may or may not agree with, but I have to say I certainly don't.
So then on this, because you're very, I guess this is like, well, it is near future, but it's also, maybe it's gone more than just what happened on the Brexit, what was done, but the disinformation that goes on there, because when the kids make it to France and the officer laughs when they said we're enemies, it's like, it seems like it's something that's fomented within the UK. So anything on there, like the use of what you're telling the story here, more than just the fact of Brexit, but just in general, what happens on, I guess, social media, because they're saying now that their computers are bad because they give you get radiation poisoning, and planes are bad, and all this stuff that people buy into.
Yeah, so I guess partly that side of it was, as you probably guess, is inspired by 1984 by George Orwell,
Sure.
where kind of the UK is at, or INGSOC as it is in the book, I think, is at war with one country, and then suddenly in the space of a minute it's changed and they're at war with someone else. So yeah, kind of the idea of using that propaganda to control the populace kind of came partly from that. And then obviously George Orwell was writing in a very different world from the one I am. Everyone is connected now. We can go onto the internet and find out what's happening all over the world. So I needed to kind of find a way to work that in terms of people having the information withheld from them, and not being able to connect with people all around the world, um, and kind of the scaremongering around technology, which is something that we often see in real life as well, or things like 4G, 5G.
Hmm.
People are, or some people are very afraid of, or were at one point anyway. So I thought that was one thing that I could use to kind of explain why communications and technology had kind of regressed so much in the world of the book.
Right. And another thing too is there's another, I guess it's a recurring theme throughout, where you've got goodness being subjugated to
Mm,
turn into a tool, a weapon, because the whole idea of the word conceptually is really cool. Being able to do that, you could do some good stuff there, but it was weaponized. And just that, like, you see that happening. I don't know if you have any specific instances of that were the inspiration for doing that. So how'd that whole thing come up in the first place, of the word?
I guess it was a way of kind of literalizing the idea of language as power. Um, 'Cause as you might have noticed, I'm Welsh, which means that you grow up immersed in language politics, whether you want to or not. And so I've always been very interested in that idea of language and narrative, and who controls it, and what that says about the world and who has the power. So yeah, that was kind of what I wanted to explore with the superpower of the word, which I don't think it's a spoiler to explain what it is. It's a small group of young people have this ability to use a kind of tone of voice to force people to obey them.
Sounds kind of like
And yeah,
Twitter. Sounds kind of like
well,
Facebook, Instagram, TikTok.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, those things can be obviously used in really good ways for people to form communities and draw attention
Mhm.
to causes, um, but obviously they can be used for ill as well,
Yeah.
and have been.
Yes. So on your on the story then, so the whole idea of dystopia. So,
Mm,
and like I said, a lot of people enjoy dystopian themes because it was very popular. It was like the theme, a decade ago, and it
mm.
still goes strong. What do you see as the value, or for yourself, the use of a dystopian theme? Is that because I started off saying it's kind of like a cautionary tale, but how do you view what you're doing with this?
Um, yeah, I guess cautionary tale's certainly part of it, because I think it's often a case of looking at what you see as being wrong about the society we live in today, and exaggerating it for effect, or for a narrative purpose. And also kind of, but also you want your readers to be invested in the characters and the story. If it's all kind of just, well, this is the society and it's terrible, people are not going to necessarily be interested in reading a whole book about that. So using it as a setting, I guess, gives you the chance to explore it in a more human and more grounded way.
Yeah. So, okay, now you mentioned realistic characters and people that you can, like, some, a different range of characters there. So
Mhm.
did you use any real life people to create the characters? Like Michael, Irina, May. I mean, he was a serious tool, but anything.
You said it. um, but no, I don't think anyone was really based on sort of a person that I've met
Hmm.
particularly, so much as, I guess, kind of lots of little bits of people go into making up a character, don't they? Often. So things like the sort of, not so much Michael himself, but the patronising church ladies who surround
Yes.
him. Kind of, there's definitely, I think, a touch of a, a certain type of person who possibly genuinely thinks that they're doing good and helping you out, but only if you adhere to their way of doing things.
Yeah, that was interesting in there. Just you have on one level, you've got people that appear to be really nice, but then when that one
Yeah,
family take in a desolate pregnant woman, and then what they actually did and how they subverted her way of life was
yeah,
Irina, right? Yes.
yes,
It
yeah,
was that was one of the more disturbing things, that they could do it and get away with it, and it was totally legal the way that had been done, and
yeah,
the way that everybody in that picture were part of the church. And so there's the
mm,
police officer and there's the midwife and all these people there that just corroborated the story. And so Irina had no say at all. It was
yeah.
very sad, but unfortunately, it came across as really real.
Thank you. I'm glad it kind of rang true,
Yeah.
and I think yeah, it's partly kind of the fact that Irina, being kind of an immigrant and having no family around her, is quite a vulnerable position, and then all these other people, they're middle class and they're in positions of power and they know how to work the system. So however hard she tries, ultimately she's stuck.
Yeah, exactly. And it costs her dearly. But that's,
Yeah.
I think, and they'll probably even have more of an impact because the people that listen to this podcast, it's listened to about 120 countries. So it's going to be a lot more people than just UK and US that are listening to this in Canada.
Yeah.
Um, but it's all over Europe and Africa. I mean, it's listened to by a lot of people. So I think a lot of people are going to enjoy this too, that whole dilemma of being a foreigner and the acceptance level that people have. You have some people that are very kind. Some people are kind with their own agenda, which is what happened here.
Yeah.
And some people are kind
Yeah.
because they're kind. You know, you've got like
Yeah.
May, who, even despite everything that happened to her, still
Mm.
kept that sense of rightness about her, and ultimately,
Yeah.
came through. But yeah, just on all these different levels that you have happening here, it's something that, somebody from, like I said, the Middle East and all throughout Europe, they can just, and it's something they can relate to, because you pull in, you've got Poland, you've got France, you've got UK,
Yeah.
and it's how you deal with that, which is, it's a bit different here in the United States. It's not that it doesn't exist, it's just different as compared
Yeah.
to, you have very distinct borders that, I think, even despite the EU, you still have distinct borders, because you've got like the dilemma that Irene had, being Polish, but in France, they wouldn't do anything to help because she's Polish, but Polish wouldn't do anything because she lives in
Yeah.
France. So
Yes.
even despite the EU, it's still, you have those borders that complicate
Yeah.
life.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it was very, even though it was like the way you put that in there was just like an aside, it still communicated that point, that even you have the big, it looks really good, the whole thing with the EU, but when you get
Mm.
down to it, there's still like borders, and
Yes.
it's still going to require the kindness of people that are going to be, that will supersede all this other stuff, because it's really the good heart of people that ultimately will make things livable.
Yeah. It's with a system, people will still slip through the cracks, and it has to be down to the people working within it to help, doesn't it?
Yes. So now, yourself as an author, now your vocation, you're a librarian, or am I saying the wrong word?
So I did work in libraries. I now work in open access publishing, which is the academic kind of
Okay,
side.
got it. All right. So I
But
wasn't totally wrong there.
yeah.
So, but you're very much a bookie, a
Yes.
book person. Yes, like you said, Welsh, but also
Yeah.
just by your studies. So, what's been your curve to become an author, and starting from, the get go?
Okay. Wow. So I think I probably started storytelling when I was really small, and as kids are, I was obsessed with dinosaurs. So I would make up all these dinosaur characters and tell my dad stories about them. And I sort of attempted to write quite a lot of books as a
Mhm.
child, most of which never sort of got finished. Because yes, again, when you're that age, you have a shiny idea and you write it down, and then you have a new shiny idea,
Yes,
and I still do that, but mostly I manage to finish them now.
which is good.
Yeah, but I was sort of in academia for quite a long time. I did a PhD on the work of H.P. Lovecraft and Arthur Machen, so kind of classic weird fiction.
Mhm.
So for quite a long time, I didn't write fiction. I wrote academic stuff, and kind of after finishing that, I sort of was a bit burned out on it, and decided to concentrate on writing fiction instead.
Good. Yeah.
Basically,
So then, how long ago till you actually got like on getting published? Because
mm.
one thing that people have a problem with is this thing called rejection. So,
Yeah.
so how did that go with you, and how did you overcome the feeling of like, oh, is it really worth it, and that type of thing?
So yeah, I got sort of shortly after starting, I got a couple of pieces published in things like everyday fiction, short little flash pieces.
Hmm.
But it took a long time to kind of get around to the standard of really being able to publish in professional markets. And in terms of books, I wrote a novel, sort of a contemporary fantasy novel, before writing The Word, and before writing my other book that I'm working on, which yeah, I had a great time writing it, but obviously it just at that point it wasn't there, so it ended up going in a drawer and never seeing the light of day. So yeah, a lot of the time the first thing you write may not be the thing that gets published, but that doesn't mean it didn't mean anything. And I think everything that you write is going to go into making you a better author eventually.
Yeah,
So
I mean, a writer writes. That's how you become better
yeah,
at writing. Reading as well.
exactly.
You
Yeah.
definitely have to read to
Well,
know
yeah,
what you
absolutely.
definitely have already established on
Mm,
your
yeah,
with your PhD and everything else that you've read a lot. And Lovecraft definitely is
yeah.
its own style of writing there.
Absolutely. I think you can certainly get a bit of what not to do as well as what to do
Yes,
from
yeah,
Lovecraft, can't you?
yeah. And we originally met when you published your story in Writers of the Future because you had Catching My Death. First of all, it was an amazing story title. So just that in itself, I had to read the story, even though I proofread the whole book. But I really wanted to read the story just because your title was so catchy. So I haven't talked about this very much in the various podcast interviews. Titles. So
Yeah,
that's like really important. So like you've got The Word and Catching My
yeah,
Death. So what's your like formula, or what do you do that you come up with these the two that I've read so far,
yeah.
great titles?
Thank you. I find titles either they come to mind immediately because there's a phrase or a word in the story that's kind of catchy,
Hmm.
and it obviously sticks out as, yeah, that's going to be the title, or they're absolutely like pulling teeth, and I just end up putting a very obvious word or phrase there. So the story about a woman being haunted by crane flies, and it's called Crane Flies. Yeah,
But it's even just the whole thing of your stories itself, the themes of them relate to I mean, they themselves, relate to that theme to your title. It was just, it was amazing. Just by the title alone, I wanted to read, and it shows the
yeah,
value of putting in the effort to have a good title, not just writing a great story, but
mm,
a title that would actually make somebody like, well, what is this?
yeah,
And the Word definitely did that too. I had I mean, it's general enough that it could have gone anywhere, The Word, but then getting into it,
yeah,
finding out what it was fascinating. And then getting into, you can enjoy the story just on the surface as here's the tale of four kids and what happens to them, each of the storyline.
yeah,
Now you do a plot format where you have then and now. So
yeah,
um, that's really interesting how you tell the story and you put it together, and it starts off with little bits, but then by having then and now, you immediately pull it out,
Mm,
and you've got the big picture that gradually unfolds, and then by the
mm,
end, it's like you see what happened. So where'd that
yeah.
come from as a form?
So I guess in terms of the words, the original shorter version was what's the first 3 chapters of the novel with Ridian and Jono hiding out in the house, and kind of Ridian remembering how they got there.
Mhm.
And kind of after writing that, I was kind of inspired by a comment that somebody made on that kind of shorter version, which got me thinking about Rachel, who is one of the other
Mhm.
kids in the novel, and she's the true believer in the word and everything it stands for. And she's also kind of the most opaque character, I think, in the novel. You never really get her point of
Right.
view, and so that got me wondering where she had come from, which drew me back to write Irina's story and then May's section
Wow,
before she,
that's
yeah,
interesting.
arrives at the centre. Yeah, and when we were editing the novel and putting it together, we did kind of think about moving those sections earlier and having it read in chronological order. But ultimately, I felt like it worked better to have this kind of quite tight focus on the kids at the start and then expand it out and then kind of move back to them.
Mhm.
Yeah, because I think that gave a bit more of a sort of panoramic view, if you
Yeah,
like.
because it's kinda like a now, then, now type
Mm.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, because like I said, I'm more used to either, like I said, the chronological sequence, or
yeah,
someone will do a flashback, which is really hard to do effectively, in the middle of a
yeah,
story. Um,
definitely.
and I 9 times out of 10, I don't like
Mm.
that format. So what you did, I hadn't seen that before, so it was like, "Wow, this is really interesting how you did this." That was great.
Yeah.
So then on the whole thing of these various characters, so I said they're not people that are part of your immediate life of what you've done, and none of these things are
Yeah.
secretly Jessica?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So on the what you see as the value of fiction, because you've done a lot, like I said, you've obviously studied a lot of nonfiction, and you're kind of like,
Yeah.
have went through your whole curve of interest, and then, okay, I'm done with it, or at least for the time being.
Yeah.
What's the value that you see of fiction and in a good story? Is it just escapist, or is it something else?
I think it can be escapist.
Mhm.
There's nothing wrong with
For sure.
escapism. We all need a bit.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a different way of approaching working through an idea than writing nonfiction is. And I think it allows you to approach things in a way that kind of straightforwardly just writing nonfiction or thinking about ideas doesn't. It kind of it's a way of thinking about the human side of things.
Mhm.
And also, obviously, we're talking about speculative fiction here,
Right.
science fiction and fantasy. And it allows you to exaggerate the world, to look at the world slightly at a different angle, I think. And that's really valuable. I think it's something we innately need as humans,
Yeah.
actually, storytelling.
Yeah, and I'll use that as a bridge now to move over to the Writers of the Future program, because
Okay.
that was the last genre that Mr. Hubbard wrote in, which is science fiction and fantasy,
Mhm.
with which
Yeah.
turned out to be the golden age of science fiction, and then he later came out and
Mhm.
wrote Battlefield Earth and Mission Earth. So, in the purpose of that is to validate and to recognize that genre and the value of the what ifs, and because he always reviewed science fiction as the herald of possibility. And so you see a lot of technology when at the Rise of the Future events. I don't know how many people you actually met there, but some of our, like, the keynote speaker we had this last year, was he had just retired as a 3-star general starting the Space Force. He was one that created the
Right.
new Space Force. And for him, he said, that's how I got started. That was my original inspiration, was that we've had many engineers over the years who have been our keynote speakers who said, yeah, I read science fiction. That's what made me wonder how to become an astronaut, or how
Mm.
to get, the various devices that are now you see walking around on Mars. they said it was science fiction that inspired me. So there's that aspect to it. So on Rise of the Future, so you're there for a week at the workshop.
Yeah.
Anything like, it's been a year and a half now, because you came out in October, was it, in 2020?
No, I was April
Oh, so it was April 2022.
2022, so it's just under a year.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
What for you was the most memorable part or most valuable part of that workshop week?
Well, I think, as I think anyone would say, the ability to kind of learn from the wisdom of Tim and Jodie and their years of experience.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely invaluable. It was amazing.
Yeah.
And the other thing that was great was the chance to kind of meet other people who are at the same stage in their careers, and a lot of us have stayed in touch and read each other's work, and it's a really supportive community.
Oh, that's good to know. Are you still in touch with Katie, the one that did your? I loved her illustration of your story.
Oh, it was beautiful. Yeah, no, I guess because she didn't come to the same year
Yeah,
as me, I didn't really get to speak to her, sadly.
yeah,
But it's a beautiful
that's
illustration.
awesome what she did.
I love it.
Yeah. Now,
Yeah.
there's on the workshop anything particular about Mr. Hubbard's either his essays or his storytelling that you remember that sticks with you?
Yeah, the obviously the way the judges in the workshop use the essays, kind of particularly talking about tension and the way you can use it to kind of thread a reader
Yeah,
through a book and keep them reading. I thought that was one thing that I thought was, yeah, a really good part of the workshop.
yeah. I know Tim really enjoyed that. In fact, he did a podcast interview on
Yeah,
the article Suspense
yeah,
and how that works.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how'd you find out about to enter the contest? And are you one of those people that entered once and won?
I think twice. Yeah, I think I came across it. Actually, just I think it was via the submissions grinder, the tool that
Mm,
people use to find places to submit their work, and that popped up. So I read the website and thought, wow, look at the people that got judging this. I've got to give it a try.
yeah,
Yes.
which is great. I know we've had pretty much a winner almost every year from the UK, and this year
Yeah.
we've Sam Parr. In fact, he just also was on BBC because they read the press
Yeah.
release, and then he had a couple articles that came out of him, and then one of the reporters from BBC read it and asked, "Can I do an interview with him?" So he did,
Wow.
which was great. So we're continuing to grow in there, and we got more and more
Great. Yeah.
distribution throughout the shops in UK,
Yeah.
and so it's growing.
Well, congratulations, Sam.
Yeah, well, it's also congratulations, Jess, on because it's just one of those things like, we have you and you had the media that you had, and we have Sam, and it continues to grow. And because of that, we are
Yeah.
able to get distribution now, and it's gradually growing there, which results in
Yeah.
more people entering the contest. We'll have more people winning. So that's
Yeah.
really good on that too. And that's people that are aspiring writers. In UK, it's definitely, JL George is one of the ones that you need to follow. But we've had other winners as well. And if you go to Writers of the Future and just you can search and find people from the UK that have won. But so to find it, you just go to writersofthefuture.com. But you said you also searched on.
It was on the submissions grinder, which is I think it's thegrinder.diabolicalplots.com, something
Uh-huh.
like that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
It's generally a useful tool all around as well.
Yeah,
So
exactly. So now on going back to your storytelling. So again, we've got people that are listening to this that are trying to get their first books out, trying to get in there. So you've gone traditional on getting an
yeah.
editor, finding a publisher, and doing that route. So how that come to be? Because that's not usually a success story that the aspiring writers have to be able to tout early on in their careers.
Well, it's I guess it was a slightly unusual path to publication because it came via the New Welsh Writing Awards, which are obviously available to writers in and from Wales. I'm sure there are other similar
Hmm.
contests going on in other countries.
Like Writers of the
But yeah,
Future.
so yeah, exactly, but for longer work
Yeah,
as well,
yeah,
yeah, but, yeah, so it was slightly unusual in that the Word wasn't the book that got me my agent. That was a different manuscript that I'm still working on rewriting at the moment. So yeah, it was slightly unusual path to publication, partly because a lot of Welsh publishers do take non-agented
Oh,
submissions, which is
wow.
unusual.
Very.
Yeah, yes, less so the case if you're based in London or somewhere like that, you know. Yeah, so yeah, I don't know if it's a path that's for everyone. Certainly, you've got the trade-off with traditional publishing and having the control, of course,
Hmm.
over what you write, or what you publish. But it's worked for me so far. So yeah.
Okay. So you do have now traditional publishing, you're going that route on this book, that the word, as well as the other one that's in the works too. So that one's
Yeah.
it's still sold. You just need to make the editorial corrections so that it gets published.
No, it's not
Oh,
sold
okay.
yet. I'm like editing at the moment so we can go out on sub.
Got
Yeah.
it.
So
So is your intention to stay traditional, or are you also interested in going indie or self?
Um, I would. I don't think I would ever want to go completely indie because I don't think personally I have the marketing nous.
Mhm.
I think I think people perhaps underrate that how big a part of the process that is when you're
For
independent.
sure.
Sometimes, and I think you obviously need to be prepared to put in a hell of a lot of work to promoting your work if you're going the indie route. But in terms of kind of shorter work, things like stories and novelettes, they the sort of long short story novelette length is often hard to place
Hmm.
because not a lot of magazines and things like that publish it. So certainly, if I had something that was kind of didn't really fit a traditional publishing niche going forward, I'd consider the indie route.
Yeah.
Yeah, for that.
I mean, your publisher was amazingly fast when you made mention to when we were first discussing doing this podcast and talking about your
Yeah,
book, because I did sent that email around about the success of the podcast. We've gotten the 2
yeah.
awards, and if anybody wanted to, they said sure. And then the next morning, I had the book from the
Oh
publicist. It
wow.
was like
Yeah,
it was amazingly
brilliant.
fast, which was
Yeah,
great. Which I must admit isn't as common of a feature from the bigger publishers. So that's really good. That
yeah,
I mean, they're an indie publisher, but they're very fast to work and very interested in your career, which is really, really nice to see. And it
yeah.
may be all the more interested in wanting to talk to you and talk to you also about this aspect as well, that you did good getting yourself someone who's interested in supporting your career and working with you.
Absolutely. I mean, Gwen, who edits the New Welsh Review as well as the books through New Welsh Rare Bite, was she's a brilliant editor. Really enjoyed working with her, and the fact that they're kind of a tiny operation, I think works. Certainly, I felt it worked to my benefit as
Mhm.
a writer because they only publish one book a year, and
Really? Wow, double congratulations to you. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you get a lot of help and yeah, and focus from the publisher in that way.
Okay, so then just again for the sake of the writer that's trying to make their break on it. So they came to you because you won the award?
Yeah, so publication was part of the prize for the award.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so but yeah, originally they would have sort of just published it Kindle only,
Mhm.
just as a Kindle single. But because I think partly they'd had quite a bit of success the previous year with the other winner, Peter Golding, who wrote a book about slate climbing, which is very good actually. Yeah, and that was a bit longer. So I think perhaps that kind of made them think, well, yeah, we can publish a longer title and do paperbacks as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, kind of benefited from that as well.
Definitely did. So, I mean, that's very good on that. So now on back to your storytelling. So
Okay.
are you pretty much dedicated or focused on the dystopian, or moving more towards Cthulhu? the
um, I haven't got any plans for books about squamous eldritch horrors at the moment, but you never know.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the book I'm working on at the moment is a similar kind of near future setting with yeah some slight tweaks from our current world. But whether whether I'll stay on that for the next one or not, I'm not quite sure. Have some fantasy ideas. I'm kind of
Really?
itching to write, so we'll see.
So the
Yeah,
next one is speculative fiction, that specifically science
yeah,
fiction near future.
yeah.
So on the ability to tell a story, like, is it intentional to have the surface story and then various levels below that, however you want to go deep into and to try to see relevancy to the world around us, so is that something that you intentionally do, or just kind of came because of the nature of the way you like to tell stories?
Yeah, I think it just kind of grew up quite naturally, really, because I think whatever story idea you tell, you're going to end up weaving your own worldview into it, aren't you?
Mhm.
It kind of happens unconsciously, as much by what you don't put in as what you do. Yeah, but yeah, I think whatever the kind of the main idea is that comes up, I'll always end up kind of with some of my own opinions and themes and pet
For sure.
ideas.
Yeah,
Yeah, working their way in
yeah.
there. Yeah.
Now, when you put this together, did you have to go and, like, delete a whole bunch of stuff? Like, when it went to the editor that says, "Wait a minute, just lose this because it was too much," or to be told, "Okay, you need to kill some of your darlings," or did that just come natural for you to know how to do that?
It's kind of the opposite way around for me. I tend to write quite short, and then need to flesh things out more later. So, I was getting, and it was a similar kind of note to what I got from Dave on my Writers of the Future story, actually, getting notes from Gwen saying, "I've no idea what this place looks like. You've got to tell me." Yeah, so it's things like setting and texture, yeah, that needed to be added afterwards.
Yeah, so now on your storytelling, what tips or advice do you have now for this aspiring writer, of what you had to go through, what you had to overcome to actually make it to sell a story, to tell a story that someone else can go, okay, this is good. You have your frustration. If I wrote it and, like, this is really good, and someone says,
Yeah.
what are you talking about? And to be able to work out from there to get something that worked. So what tips or advice do you have on that?
I think it's really important to write something you're passionate about, which sounds obvious, but I think if you're just trying to write something to market or because it's the current big thing, and your heart's not really in it, it's that's going to come through in the writing.
Hmm.
And if you don't care that much about it, why should you read us? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes.
it's definitely not fan fiction what you write. Definitely not. So,
Mm,
um, so again, back to the question more fully answered on suggestions, advice, and tips for the aspiring writer.
yeah.
What have been some of your things that, like, discourage you, that, and then how you overcame that? Because a lot of times people are aspiring and they just kind of, like, they get that rejection, or they get someone saying,
Mm,
"Don't give up that day job."
yes. I mean, you absolutely have got to have a thick skin, haven't you?
Hmm.
And get used to rejection and the fact that however hard you work on your story, however good the end product is, someone out there is not going to like it.
Yeah,
Someone's going to come along and said, "Well, the story was about robots, and I wanted a story about dinosaurs. Come on!" And you've got to learn to take the bits of criticism which are useful and let the rest flow off your back. I think.
yeah. One thing that I definitely like to promote, but it's also something that, everybody I talk to usually has a perspective about this, but having your own close knit group of nice people, you've
Yeah.
got what I refer to as the soul suckers, that like to
Mhm.
come in and will just, like, nitpick you apart and make you feel like it's useless trying to do anything anyway. So how much has that played a role for yourself, having good people, have a core of good people around you?
That is so important, I think, in terms of, you know, having people that you trust with your writing and people that you know are gonna help you tell the story you want to tell and not try and make it into the story they would tell if they were writing
Right.
it. Yeah, I think that's yeah, it's really important, and especially you can reach a place when you've been writing or working on something for so long, you don't know which way's up and you can't tell if it's any good anymore, and at that point, you need to be able to send it to someone and go, okay, tell me what you honestly think about this.
Exactly. So how do you do that? Do you have alpha readers, beta readers, just a writing group? What is it? How do you do it with your stories?
So kind of prior to coming to the workshop, I had a couple of sort of beta readers who I was in contact with, and I still am. And we'll sort of swap chapters or swap stories and read each other's work, provide comments, sometimes through several drafts, and sometimes it's kind of, right, I need to send this off tomorrow. Can you proofread it for me? It just depends on kind of what stage the work is at the time. And I've, as I mentioned, also stayed in touch with quite a lot of the writers from the workshop that I went to, and we'll quite often sort of pop a note in the group chat and say, I've got a story. Can anyone have a look at it? And every time someone will come along and volunteer to help, which is lovely.
Which is great. So you then don't necessarily have a writers group you're part of, other than you've got your friends that you've made from the workshop the Writer's Future workshop.
Yeah.
But also you had people before the workshop, which are still trusted viewpoints for yourself.
Yeah, I used a site called Critique Match, which you can use to kind of match yourself up with other writers who want to kind of swap critiques. And it's obviously it's on the internet, so it could be anyone. It's a bit hit or miss, but I find a few readers and writers that I clicked with well, and I've stayed in touch. So
okay, that's good. So then, what type of advice do you accept, and what type of advice do you say, well, thank you very much, and just let it slide? How do you distinguish between what you're going to use and what you don't use?
I think it's a case of kind of retaining an idea in your head of the story you wanted to tell, or the message you wanted to get across, and what you wanted to be saying, and figuring out, is this advice helping me tell that story, or is it trying to make it into a different story that I didn't want to write? Yeah.
Okay.
And
Go ahead.
yeah, I think sometimes that'll be obvious, and sometimes you'll need to spend a bit more time thinking about it and maybe tinkering around and going, well, does that work or doesn't it? And that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah. And then do you ever get yourself into a corner or into a stalemate with what's happening in your story and just ask someone else, like, what do you think so far? Or do you just kind of back up until you're like, okay, this is where I was last doing well, and go forward again? Or how do you deal with that?
Oh, well, that's a difficult one. Um, I think I can't remember who I heard it from or where I read it, but one piece of advice or piece of observation, I guess, that I've found rings true for me is that a reader or a critiquer can usually tell you when there's a problem with your story, or where the problem is, but not necessarily how to fix it. Yeah. So I think in terms of, if something's not working, I wouldn't necessarily say, what should I do to fix this? But I'd say, where are you losing interest? Where are you getting confused in the story? And the answer to that question will quite often give the answer that you need to fix it.
That's one thing Algis Budrus did. He was the first coordinating judge for the contest.
Yeah.
He would read a story, and the point that he was bounced out was, okay, look, I just lost interest right here. He'd be reading along, and at a certain point, it's just like, okay, I'm out of the story. And that's what he would send back. Okay, good. So this is where you lost me. And that would sometimes help the writer to get back to it. Did you find it difficult to kill off any of your characters? Or is that just something that it made sense? And in real world, you never have everybody lives happily ever after.
Exactly. Yeah. It made sense that, not everybody was going to make it out alive. And I don't really struggle with killing people off because they're not real.
Whoa. Okay. Because that's sometimes people have a problem with the term killing off your darlings, so
yeah.
I mean, it's easier to confront, killing off a secondary or tertiary character, but when you have a main character, it's like, really? But I mean, that's also that makes a lot more angst in the story too.
It does. I have got one story. It's nowhere near finished yet, but where I know one of the main characters is going to die at the end, and I've already written like a little a little coda where he comes back to life, and that's not going to be in the story, but it's in my head, so
So it's okay.
in my head he's fine, so it's fine that I killed him off.
Yeah. In Herbert's story, Battlefield Earth, there's a whole race that's killed off by the cyclos, and they're the ones that create the learning machines. They're the ones that create all those
Right.
teaching people how to learn different languages. And he wrote a note which we published in the 2016 edition, which were handwritten notes, and one of them was like, there were some of them were found in this other planet, and so they're brought back to Earth, and they're given all types of restoration stuff. And it's like, okay, good, because they're really good people. You just hate seeing them, like, they're such nice people. What they did there, and they're so so nice. So it didn't make it in the book, but it's one of the author notes. So maybe it's not dissimilar what you just said there. It's like, okay, you've got this coda, you got to say, okay, good.
Yeah.
So he's dead, but he's not really dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what's your writing schedule like? Because you've got a regular, is your day job now as an author, or you still write, you still work?
Yeah, I have a day job. So I'm quite lucky in terms of I work compressed hours, so I get a day a week where I just write, and I just work slightly longer hours the rest of the week. And obviously, if you've got an employer that's willing to do that, then I highly recommend it.
Yes.
Yeah. But but you've got to protect your writing time. I think it can be very easy to kind of sort of think, oh well, that's not my day job, so it's free time, and if someone invites me to go do something else or wants me to go do something else, I'll go do that. But no, you've got to take it seriously.
Yeah, I agree with that. So now so you say your writing time. So because different authors have different definitions for writing time. Because is research part of writing time for you?
Yes.
So how does it go? Like, what's your ratio of like research, working out, and also do you flesh out each chapter first, or you do the beginning, end, and then just let the middle go as it goes to get to the end, or how does that work for you?
Oh, so is this the plotter or pantser question?
Yeah, or in between, hybrid.
Kind of, yeah. I'm a pretty strict plotter, certainly initially when I'm starting. And sometimes as I write, I'll end up going off in a slightly different direction. But I kind of need a framework, a skeleton to kind of flesh out as I write, I think. So
Tim Powers is definitely like that too. He definitely plots the whole thing out there with his 3x5 cards. So how do you do your thing? Is it to have your different sections and be able to move them around? And
no, I usually plot in quite a linear way. So I just have a page a chapter and go through and kind of sketch out what's going to happen in each chapter, and might switch them around at the end if something's not working. But certainly when I'm writing the first draft, it's pretty start to finish.
I get it. So do you know the beginning and end and then work out or do you just write and takes it to the end?
Usually I know the end. Yeah. Sometimes, occasionally I don't, because I get too excited about the beginning and start plotting it.
So like with the word, did you know how it was going to end and then you worked towards it, or how'd that work?
So I guess that was a slightly unusual one again, because it took shape in two parts. So the first one, the first version, which was the novelette version, the ending was the clearest thing in my head from the start. And then as I kind of fleshed out around that, like sort of each section had its own ending, I guess, but I wasn't quite sure which order they were going to exist in the book at the time. But ultimately they ended up in the order in which I wrote them. So so maybe I did know the end, really.
Yeah, I mean, it was good too, because it was, I mean, the whole theme of that you address there, it's dystopian, but at the end, you've got that uptick that's like, okay, in the end, humanity prevails, and with May and coming in, and with Irina, that's with her, that's kind of like Irina finally said, okay, maybe I will, where she's just all of a sudden there's that silver lining that shines at the end. That's, no matter how dark a cloud can be, a silver lining can always be made to exist.
Yeah, I think it's kind of, okay, they're not destroying the dystopian regime and saving the world, but that doesn't mean that the the friendships they've formed and what they've done to support each other is meaningless. It still matters.
Exactly. I think that's important because there can be a sense of futility when you see things going on and just like, and that's part of what it does too. It beats you down thinking there's nothing you can do about it. And that's what definitely was, in that whole thing that was happening in the UK at that point. There's nothing you can do about it anyway. But these guys are trying, but at least they accepted that they didn't have to totally buy into it and just succumb.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is good. A relief.
Yes.
There's hope for us after all.
Let's hope so.
So, in terms of your future as an author, so you got this one book you're in the middle of. So is your intention to go to becoming full-time author where that becomes what pays your rent and everything? Or is that your ultimate goal to hopefully build to that?
And that's the dream, yes. But if it doesn't end up going that way and I keep the day job and keep writing at the same time, I'll be happy with that, because the main thing is just that I get to write.
Which I think that's important too and this will be like the last area to get into before we make sure you tell people how to find your book and find you.
Yeah.
Your drive, your purpose as an author. Yeah. What value do you think that has to anybody as a writer to ultimately overcome and make it is your purpose and drive? Because that you can tell a good story is fine. A lot of people can do that, but it's the purpose and drive to push that. So talk about that, please, a little bit for yourself, how that plays out.
So I think the reason I write ultimately is because the story's in my head and I need to get it out, and that's it. And it's something that you probably, if you feel the same thing yourself, you recognize that and you go, yeah, that's why I write too. I have to. I don't have a choice.
Which is a great answer. That's something I think that people need to not resist, actually do.
Yeah.
In terms of, so I've got a story. I really want to tell it. I don't know how to do it. I mean, obviously we offer the free online Writers of the Future workshop at writersofthefuture.com. But any other tips you've got for a writer on helping him to realize that urgency of telling my story?
I'd say when you're writing your first draft, give yourself permission to be a bit rubbish. Because the important thing is that you have something to work on. And if you kind of hold it in your head and you keep turning it around and you're going, oh, I'm not sure if this is going to be right, I'm not sure if it's going to work, you will never write it and you'll never make it better. So you have to get it down and not worry too much if you've got some clunky phrasing or a bit of a plot hole, because you can go back and you can make it better and you can polish it.
That's good. Yeah, I interviewed 2 weeks ago a girl, Rebecca Hardy from London, who wrote her first book on her cell phone on the tube going back from her home, except it was a smaller than this one here. She wrote her book on her telephone, commuting back and forth. She said, I had to. I said, I'm actually pretty good at typing, so I just did it there. I said, I'm never going to do that again, but that's how I did I had to write my story.
I have huge respect for that. Wow.
Yeah, so that was definite a dedication there to be able to do that.
Yeah.
So now on your book, so the word and so it's by J.L. George. So how does somebody find it and where do they go to find it?
So they can find it on Amazon, of course. If you're in the UK, you can find it at Waterstones or your local indie bookshop. Please support it if you have one. Or you can also go to the New Welsh Review website and find the links on there. That's
great. And how does somebody find you? Where do they go for that? Because there's multiple, at least one other Jessica George or JL George.
Yes, that's why I'm JL and not Jessica, actually. Yeah. So I have a website, which is www.jl-george.com. You can also find me on Twitter at jlgeorgewrites or on Mastodon at jlgeorge@toot.wales.
Good. And you can also find her on writersofthefuture.com with her book, with her story in Writers of the Future Volume 36, which is, like I said, how we originally met, and Catching My Death, which is another, it's an amazing story. It was the first place winner there for Volume 36. So that's shorter fiction. So that's another good one to be able to meet J.L. George as an amazing author, and one to definitely look forward to reading more of your work.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for listening. Writers of the Future series can be purchased wherever books are sold in the US, Canada, the UK, Australia, and South Africa, and available everywhere via Amazon.com. Subscribe to the Writers of the Future podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We've also been syndicated on the United Public Radio Network, where you can find these podcasts as well. We are especially appreciative of our sponsor, Carnation, for supporting this podcast. Carnation has been making delicious milk products for over a century and is still going strong. Writers and Illustrators of the Future are contests created by L. Ron Hubbard to provide a means for the aspiring writer and artist to be seen and acknowledged. It is free to enter and open to amateur short story writers and artists of science fiction or fantasy. Again, thank you very much, Jess.
Thank you, John.
Hello, and welcome to the Writers and Illustrators of the Future podcast. This is John Goodwin, your host. This podcast is dedicated to the aspiring writer and artist and will provide inspiration and tips from top professionals in the field. If you've been listening to this podcast or are new to it, I thank you very much. I would also appreciate if you took a moment to follow it on whatever platform you use to listen to your podcasts. Today's guest is author Jessica George, who writes under the pen name J.L. George. She lives in Cardiff, Wales, and writes weird and speculative fiction. She also writes contemporary urban fantasy as Louise Long. Welcome, Jessica.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, actually, we're having you back now because you were on the podcast when we were at the awards workshop week back in April of 2022. So this time it's just you and me instead of all the UK winners.
Yes, yeah, no cushion. Oh, dear.
Yes. So I will obviously want to discuss the book, The Word, and how it came to be. But I'd also like to address the use of dystopian theme to convey a cautionary tale of what to avoid. So now there have been various incarnations of the word.
Yes, so it started life as a kind of 12,000-ish word novelette, which I entered for the New Welsh Writing Awards in 2019. And they do generally focus on short form writing. So it won the first place for that.
Which is amazing. I just want to congratulate
Yeah.
you for that, but make sure I had it straight. That was like, that was in 2019, right? That you won that award.
Yes, it was. Yeah, thank you. So it won one of the two prizes which formed part of that year's New Welsh Writing Awards, which was the Aberystwyth University Award for a Dystopian Novella. And part of the prize for that was publication with New Welsh Rare Bites, which is the publishing arm of the New Welsh Review.
Right.
And so kind of about a year later, when they were getting ready to publish, Gwen, who is the editor, got in touch with me sort of saying, do you have any other stories that we could add to make a bit of to pad it out, make a bit of a longer collection? And that happened to be after the first COVID lockdown, which I had spent writing a continuation of the words, prompted by a comment made in a critique by the agent Catherine Summerhays. And so I sort of got back to her and said, well, I don't have any short stories you can have at this point, but I do have another 70,000 words in the same world. Yeah. So we can put that together and make a novel. Yeah.
Which is amazing. It was like, because I didn't read your shorter version of The Word, but it was interesting on your book, The Word. And we're also we'll be asking on this interview questions that are a little bit maybe different than normally when you talk about a book, because we're going to talk about the book, but I also want to talk about what went into it and how you came to be, because a lot of the audience on this are aspiring writers, so they can get some inspiration from yourself and what to do, because it's a very popular genre, has been for some years, the whole idea of dystopian science fiction. So what was the inspiration? Obviously, you've got the UK having broken from the EU, or at least that's what it seems to be, as a basis. But I don't know if that's the basis or something else was the basis that started it.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That was one thing that went into it. It would be disingenuous to pretend that Brexit didn't have anything to do with it. Kind of after quite a long period, really, of kind of anti-immigrant sentiment being whipped up in the tabloid press, and which I think was something that really contributed to people voting for Brexit, which you may or may not agree with, but I have to say I certainly don't. Yeah,
So yeah, so then on this, so then because you're very, it's, I guess this is like, well, it is near future, but it's also maybe it's gone more than just what happened on the Brexit, what was done, but the disinformation that goes on there,
mm,
because when the kids make it to France and the officer laughs when they said we're enemies, it's like,
mhm.
it seems like it's something that's fomented within the UK. So anything on there like the use of what you're telling the story here, more than just the fact of Brexit, but just in general, what happens on, I guess, social media, because they're saying now that their computers are bad because they give you get radiation poisoning, and planes are bad, and all this stuff that people buy into.
Yeah, so, I guess partly that side of it was, as you probably guess, is inspired by 1984 by George Orwell,
Sure.
where, kind of the UK is at, or INGSOC, as it is in the book, I think, is at war with one country, and then suddenly, in the space of a minute, it's changed and they're at war with someone else. So, yeah, kind of the idea of using that propaganda to control the populace kind of came partly from that. And then obviously George Orwell was writing in a very different world from the one I am. Everyone is connected now. We can go onto the internet and find out what's happening all over the world. So I needed to kind of find a way to work that in terms of people having the information withheld from them, and not being able to connect with people all around the world, um, and kind of the scaremongering around technology, which is something that we often see in real life as well, or things like 4G, 5G.
Hmm.
People are, or some people are very afraid of, or were at one point anyway. So I thought that was one thing that I could use to kind of explain why communications and technology had kind of regressed so much in the world of the book.
Right. And another thing too is there's another, I guess it's a recurring theme throughout, where you've got goodness being subjugated to
Mm,
turn into a tool, a weapon, because the whole idea of the word conceptually is really cool. Being able to do that, you could do some good stuff there, but it was weaponized, and just that, like, you see that happening. I don't know if you have any specific instances of that were the inspiration for doing that. So how'd that whole thing come up in the first place, of the word?
I guess it was a way of kind of literalizing the idea of language as power. Um, 'Cause as you might have noticed, I'm Welsh, which means that you grow up immersed in language politics, whether you want to or not. And so I've always been very interested in that idea of language and narrative, and who controls it, and what that says about the world and who has the power. So yeah, that was kind of what I wanted to explore with the superpower of the word, which, I don't think it's a spoiler to explain what it is. It's, a small group of young people have this ability to use a kind of tone of voice to force people to obey them.
Sounds kind of like
And yeah,
Twitter. Sounds kind of like
well,
Facebook, Instagram, TikTok.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, those things can be obviously used in really good ways for people to form communities and draw attention
Mhm.
to causes. Um, but obviously they can be used for ill as well,
Yeah.
and have been.
Yes. So on your on the story then, so the whole idea of dystopia. So,
Mm,
and like I said, a lot of people enjoy dystopian themes because it was very popular. It was like the theme, a decade ago, and it
mm.
still goes strong. What do you see as the value, or for yourself, the use of a dystopian theme? Is that because I started off saying it's kind of like a cautionary tale, but how do you view what you're doing with this?
Um, yeah, I guess cautionary tale's certainly part of it, because I think it's often a case of looking at what you see as being wrong about the society we live in today, and exaggerating it for effect, or for a narrative purpose. And also kind of, but also you want you want your readers to be invested in the characters and the story. If it's all kind of just, well, this is the society and it's terrible, people are not going to necessarily be interested in reading a whole book about that. So using it as a setting, I guess, gives you the chance to explore it in a more human and more grounded